Hi, I'm Sierra and welcome to my kitchen. As you can see, I have some bacon done over here, but it's Saturday at noon and I'm going to show you how to make the most wonderful biscuit bacon sandwiches for brunch. And I have some homemade biscuits working in the oven right now, and it's so easy. I'll show you how to make them. And now for the star of your brunch, we have homemade biscuits. And here are all the ingredients you're going to be using. You probably have all of these in your pantry. So first things first, you're going to want 2 cups of flour. You're going to want a teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of baking powder, and a tablespoon of sugar because that just enhances the taste of the biscuits. You're also going to want half a cup of butter, and I'm going to show you how to integrate your butter into your flour. But you're going to want it as cold as possible, like frozen, super, super cold. And then you want a 3/4 cup of milk and a tablespoon of white wine vinegar, or you can just do 3/4 cup of buttermilk, but you probably don't have buttermilk, so I'm going to show you how to actually make that from stuff you have in your house already. Okay, so one of the very first steps is you're going to want to actually work with your butter, and you're going to want to use a cheese grater to get those little chunks of butter. If you have a pastry cutter, that works too, but I feel like pastry cutters are super annoying and I don't have one. So I'm going to show you how to just grate your butter, like so, just the whole stick. Okay, so here you have a grated half cup of butter, and you're gonna want to throw this back in the fridge, back in the freezer, get it back to as cold as possible, just until you have readied your dried ingredients. Okay, so for the base of your biscuits, you want to start with 2 cups of flour. So you'll grab your 2 cups. Make sure they're level cups, but you don't have to pat them down. 1 and 2. This recipe makes about 6 biscuits, and flour is super duper messy, as you can see, like everywhere. Okay, boop, 2 cups. And I have pre-measured my 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of salt. The reason I'm not adding more salt is because baking powder is salty, so you don't want to add too much of that because you're already getting some salt from the baking powder. So you're going to want to just combine that so it's all homogeneous. And then we're about to start the fun part, which is adding the butter. Okay, so you have your butter fresh out of the fridge and your homemade buttermilk, and you're going to want to work quickly because you don't want them to warm up too much. Because if the butter warms, then it gets it doesn't get flaky like you want it to, and there's no delicious little pockets of butter because it's all melted throughout. Like, for example, if you make drop biscuits, they're more of like dinner rolls because you use melted butter. With this, they're really flaky and airy, very similar to the Pillsbury Grand Rolls. So let me go ahead and integrate the butter. I'm using a rubber spatula. You don't want to use your hands too much at first because that will warm up the butter too much. Okay, so then you just stir. And the reason I like using the grater is because it comes together way quicker. As you can see, it's already starting to form those crumbs, and you don't have to get like an arm workout using that pastry cutter. And with about a minute of stirring later, you have pretty much the consistency that you want. By the way, I want to credit this blog that actually taught me that grater trick, and that blog was Sugar Spun Run, and it's a cooking blog. It's what I base this recipe off of. Of course, I make my own tweaks after I like play with it a little, see what I like, and I changed it up. I made it my own, but she taught me that grater trick, and it's honestly a lifesaver. Okay, now since you went ahead and everything kind of looks like crumbs, as you can see, you can go ahead and add your homemade buttermilk, or just milk. Milk works fine. If you don't feel like doing that, I just feel like it adds better flavor. Okay, so use a rubber spatula. Just integrate it a little bit. You don't want to overwork the dough. You just want it to come together a little bit. So I'm very gently just scraping, bringing to the center. Scrape, bring to the center. And you want to kind of start to come together like this. It's not going to come together completely until you start to knead it, but I want to wait to knead it as long as possible. It's summer here too, so that definitely melts the butter a little bit faster. And whenever it starts to look like this, and you don't have a lot of flour, you have mainly those chunks, that's when you're going to want to use your clean hands and start to make it into an actual dough. So what I do, as you can see, is I take my hand, I scoop from the bottom, I press up, scoop from the bottom, press up. And this dough is not a very wet dough, so it's really easy to work with. If you find your dough being a little like too wet, too sticky, then go ahead and add just a little bit more flour, and vice versa. If you see it's too dry, it's not coming together, go ahead and add a little bit more milk. But you're going to want to just go ahead and work it like this. And again, if you see little chunks of butter in there, that's a good thing. You don't want it to look completely homogeneous. You want it to just come together and look super duper flaky. And you want it to pretty much come together like this. And as you can see, I've prepped my workstation. I never like working directly on the counter because I use Clorox wipes. And I don't really want my food to taste like Clorox. So I like to work on a little just parchment paper surface. And there's this technique that you can do, right? Where you take your dough, and as you see, it's flaky, it's gorgeous, and you just pull it and flatten it. And you're going to want to do this a few times because it makes all those layers, all those buttery, fantastic layers. And then you just flatten it back down. Have to use a little bit of your body weight. You also don't want to use a rolling pin for this recipe because it will like flatten those layers too much and you won't have a lot of definition in your biscuit. Okay, and then you just flatten it, and you want to do this about 5 or 6 times. Okay, and then go ahead and flatten it out. And I flatten it out so it's about 1 inch thick. So about like that thick. It's an estimate. Like, this isn't a super exact recipe, and it's always so nice because it's very customizable. Like if you want to add herbs or cheese, do that during the flour stage. Okay, and that's kind of what it looks like right now. And you want to use an inch cookie cutter, but I don't have those. So I'm going to actually use a glass because that's better. And sometimes you don't have these things in your kitchen. You have to improvise. So just use a glass because that's about the size of biscuit I want for my sandwiches. So you just go down, press, 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 press. Be gentle. It is a glass. You don't want to break it. But if you look up close, look at that biscuit. And you see all those little layers right there, all the little pieces of butter. And that will rise and be delicious. Go and finish that up. You want about 6 of them. So here are your 6 biscuits. If you want, you can always add a little honey butter on top, a little herb butter if you want. When in doubt, always add more butter. But I think that they're pretty perfect as is for my sandwiches. So just stick them in the oven for about 12 minutes or until their tops start to get all nice and golden brown. So the biscuits are done. I went ahead and turned off the oven, but they're finished and they rose beautifully. And as you can see, like, they're big, beautiful, and flaky, and I can't wait to cut one open for you. Now let's let them cool. Let the babies rest.